Well, thanks everybody for being here with us. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about auctions and in the real estate space. And we brought in a couple of experts that's been reduced to one expert because the other expert is a little bit busy right now. But we have Daniel Steinfeld with us today, who's going to take us through his product and I think auctions in general, sort of how they work, how they came to be, what the rules are around all this stuff. And maybe, if you see an opportunity in your business, what are you going to do about that if an auction situation comes your way? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell
Absolutely.
us a little bit about you and how we got here?
Sure. So thanks for having me and hello, everybody. Yeah, so this started for us at least about 3.5 years ago and change. There was a story that a lot of people, definitely in our market, we're in the GTA, and I think across Canada might be familiar with that Marketplace did on CBC, exposing blind bidding wars and some of the stuff that can be underhanded. And even though it might just be one or two bad apples, it really brought the question, why can't there be more transparency in real estate? And so um, my wife and I, who both practiced and both were with a different brokerage at the time, sort of said, yeah, why isn't there more transparency? And at that time, they outlined Australia, where a lot of people are familiar with the auction process being something that's prevalent there. And so we just from there asked a lot of questions, did a lot of research, and ultimately at that time built our own brokerage and platform that was built around the idea of whether auctions are a viable possibility. Fast forward to now, and we are running an auction house as well as our brokerage, and have done, I think now, 16 or so. I know that's a very specific number, so let's say it is 16 auctions in Ontario, and one out actually in BC, that have been all different in shapes and sizes. But recently, in the last couple months, we've done three that have gone really well in Kingston, which is closest to you guys, and then out in Burlington near us, and then also in Bowmanville, which is sort of in between. Um, and I'm just happy to talk about, I guess, how we got here, the way it works, some of the nuances to it, when it works, when it doesn't, and answer any questions that you've got about it.
It only just
I,
occurred to me that you might be able to do this across Canada because auctioneering isn't licensed or registered the same way as real estate. How does that work?
So yeah, that's a good question. So the one we did in BC, we did partner with a local realtor out there whose listing it was, and we were effectively the auction house. So the auction house is based in our Vaughan, which is just north of Toronto. Um, and so the auctioneer license and the auction house itself, basically, because it's online, it's uncharted waters even in the regulation side. But basically, because it's online, the auction itself is taking place in Vaughan, regardless of where the property is, because that's where the tech is, so to speak. So for that reason, we're still regulated under our auction license here, but the listing itself can take place anywhere across the country because they're abiding by their own board's rules and whatever might paperwork wise and all that might be specific to their market.
so I think it was pretty hard to miss the auction you guys just did in Kingston. That got a ton of press before and after. Do you want to maybe dive in, like for many of us on the call, we don't have the same kind of technical background like I know Jody does. So maybe just kind of give us a really brief overview of what happened.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, they're all really exciting. And it's funny, like every single one we've done has pretty much been the first of its kind in the market it's in, right? Because nobody's really seen these before in any town or market. So Kingston was definitely not an exception to that. For that, we had a call from a realtor that we're close with for years now, who we got to know, Jessica Hellard, who was the listing agent on that. And she's been a fan of the platform and asked if it was something that we could help her out with over there, because bidding wars and a lot of this blind bidding stuff has become a gong show over there as well. And it's getting frustrating, like what we saw here in 2017 and again now. And yeah, we instituted a similar approach that we did in BC. She ran the listing, so everything was done exactly the way that all of you and all of us are familiar with, as far as listing and MLS and showings and photos and all that. The one big difference was the mechanism she used to come up with a price was this transparent online model, which the easiest way to put it is it's kind of like eBay for homes, I guess, is the best way. If you're familiar with any sort of online platform like eBay, it works similar to that with some tweaks and changes that are specific to real estate and make things safer and more secure and more relevant for what real estate purchase is like. She ran the listing. I mean, do you want the specifics sort of how high level she did it, like in terms of timing and all that, or we, or just generally? I mean, generally all of our auctions now run a similar way where, again, it's the same idea as if it were a blind bidding war. So she ran it, she priced it only moderately below maybe where the market was, but this was also unique in that it was what's called a no reserve auction. So a high bid was going to take it regardless. So the opening bid for her was 349. Which is a number her client would have been content getting if that was the only bid on the table. And that makes a big difference because the seller in that particular case wasn't protected. If there was one bid and someone bid 349, it was going to sell for 349. The nice thing about the auctions though, and the transparency, is that when people see the number and when people know this is going to sell, people, I mean, for lack of a better word, they let their guard down a little bit more and they're more confident going to their maximum and trusting the process. So because of that, I think in the end she got, I don't know if anybody here knows, it was 50 something or 60 something bids altogether on that auction. There are minimum increments, so they weren't going up $1 at a time. They go up at that level at a minimum of $1,000 at a time. She landed up selling it. I mean, I don't even have the number. I think, what was it, like 480, 470, for something high, something that really blew away probably what a comparable property, even in a bidding war situation, would have received in that area. She landed up selling it to an out-of-town buyer, which I don't know if people have talked about. I mean, I know that we can't disclose identities, but it actually was somebody from out of town who had seen the property, but because of the tech side of things, was able to just log in and bid from 150 kilometers away. And it was the exact same process for that person as it was for the other people. For the actual auction itself, the process was people go to showings, do all the stuff they'd normally do, and they can register on the site. It's an online platform with nothing more than an email address initially. And that just gives them the opportunity to download things like the home inspection, things like all the extra info that they might need to inform their decision. If they're ready to bid, the registration process gets a little bit deeper with some more, identity verification and credit card info and things like that. So on the actual general registration side, we had almost 100 people just registering for that particular property, which was, to put it in perspective, that is basically in line with the other biggest auction we ever did. 100 is a lot of people in less than a week's time to register interest and give up their contact info. But as bidders, we had, I think, 18 people registered as bidders, which is also a huge number. One thing that's another difference here between that and what you'd be familiar with in a blind bidding situation is you're familiar probably with people registering offers like the Form 801 and all that stuff. If someone registers an offer in a blind bidding war, they're making an offer. And that in some ways is the only information that informs other potential bidders about how high they need to go. Like, oh, how many offers are there? I guess I need to go 50 grand high or whatever. In this case, we had 18 people registered, but that doesn't obligate them to bid. It just means they're in a position to do so. So the number of registered bidders is irrelevant. Nothing matters to people who are participating other than what's the number it's at right now. Like, you can actually see it. So there's no guesswork. And ultimately, of the 18, I think 7 or 8 actually did participate with bids.
So take us through that. How do you paper this thing? Someone logs onto the auction site, they enter a bunch of information, a credit card stuff, and then they're ready to bid. How do you paper that in a real estate? How do you bridge that gap? Are those clients, customers, are they, the unrepresented thing that the registrar talks about? And, what do you do with that?
Are there even agents involved? I think Paula asked if there's even agents involved, right? So.
And yeah, great question, because I think especially when we started, the biggest question, it wasn't even a question, the biggest comment we got from people was, you're just trying to shut out the agents. Like, this is just a big system to make us all irrelevant. And I'll start by saying, we're realtors. We did this because realtors really benefit from this. This entire process is predicated on the participation of clients and their realtors. One part of the answer is, can somebody bid without a realtor? Short answer is yes. I'm going to get to though why that is difficult and not in their best interest in a second. The other part of the answer is, in all 16 auctions we've done, we've never had a purchase of someone who was unrepresented. And I don't mean by us, like there's never been a multiple rep situation. It's always been a realtor representing a buyer. And that's because the way that this system works is, and I'll get to the paper question too, but I'll sort of start with this, is when somebody registers, right away, the first thing that pops up on their screen, and everybody, you're welcome after the fact. I mean, we can share the link to where the auctions take place at otbauctions.com. If you sign in right now, the first part of the registration before you put any info in is a button that says, I have a realtor, I don't have a realtor. And that puts you down two different fork in the road, down two different avenues. If you say you don't have a realtor, it doesn't let you just start registering. It gives you this humongous warning effectively that says, among other things, you're not benefiting by not having a realtor here. If you bid and don't have a realtor, this is what a customer relationship looks like. This is what a client relationship looks like. Should you ever go down the road of bidding and still not have a realtor, you will be required to execute a customer service agreement, a working with a realtor. It explains the forms, and it dives really deep into the fact that, at least in our market, people without realtors go out of their way to contact listing agents because they think it's going to get them a deal. They think that, well, okay, I'm calling you, you're double ending, give me a cut on my commission or whatever, and I can get a better price. This makes it very clear that that's not an option here, because this isn't a platform that works out collateral agreements or discounts. Everyone's bidding against everybody else with the exact same commission. So if someone were to go through all that and say, I could care less, I don't want a realtor, I'm happy, I'm going to put my big pants on and I think I know what I'm doing, they're just up against a bunch of people with realtors on an even playing field and with less advice and less context to what the place is worth and what they should be bidding. But to answer the question that closes the loop on that, if that were to happen, then the listing brokerage would be entitled to double end the deal because there is no discount. So in that case, the commission total to the seller would be the same. In the event, I suppose, if a listing agent did have a collateral agreement with their client, they'd have to disclose that the same way they would with a bidding war. We've never run into that. Again, we've never had a double end on it. I think in all the bids we've seen on the platform, there's been 2 people who haven't been represented who have actually placed a bid, and they haven't come close to winning. But in those cases, these aren't lone wolves either. If somebody does go through all that, register, not have an agent, and have a bidder account, you can rest assured they're going to be contacted and vetted by the listing brokerage prior to actually making a bid. And that's one. I mean, we're not such a tech company that we're into like V1, V2 and betas and all that junk yet, but we do make tweaks to it. And that's one area where we've thought, you know what, we should bolster that side of things for people who are unrepresented, that there's maybe an additional step in terms of really vetting them in a way that they can't bid unless we've got A, B, and C lined up. Right now, we've got a good amount of information, but we learn something new with every auction. It's so new that we've made at least one minor change after every auction just to make the process cleaner and better for everybody that's involved.
So you sort of led into it's kind of like eBay idea. In real estate, we call it a bully offer. In your space, you might call it a buy it now price.
Yep.
Is that a thing?
So we do have a buy it now option that we originally built in. In the first auction we did, we had a buy it now button on the auction. It is still something we can put on there. That's an example of one of the places where we learned that we haven't seen a situation where that's going to be beneficial. The reason being, when you show your cards with a buy it now price, yes, that might be the magic number your seller wants, but it also sends messages the same way blind offers do to all the other people who are bidding, especially if it's a reserve auction, which most of our auctions are. And I haven't talked about that, but most of our auctions have what's called a reserve price, which is also an eBay thing, which basically is the minimum number at which the seller's obligated to take the high offer. So bidding might start at 500 grand, but there might be a reserve price of 525. And if the bidding doesn't reach 525, the house may not sell. Buyers are still obligated to their bid, but the seller may opt not to take that. If you've got a buy it now price and the reserve price isn't met, so let's say it's that same example, bidding starts at 500. There's a reserve price of 525, but the buy it now is 700. People participating might say, oh, the reserve price is probably like 600, 650 on this. I'm not even bothering. And it actually hurts the process potentially. But it is an option we've got. The other side, though, that's like eBay as well, that is what we use is that max bid, or putting in a number that's bigger than the minimum that you can enter in there, and it's not your bid. So it's not something that shows up immediately. It effectively protects you to your maximum, so you don't have to sit there and keep outbidding $1,000 at a time. And we do see a lot of people do that, even right from the get-go. They'll put in a max bid and just leave it. And then if anybody bids higher than them, it just automatically outbids until they reach their maximum.
And so I'm super curious about the paper again, because in real estate, you know, a listing agreement is an offer to treat. So even if someone brings you the terms of that listing agreement, the seller's never under any obligation to sell, right? Until the day they sign, it's not there. How does that work with I guess auctions are fundamentally different, where, you know, the moment something goes up for auction, it has to be, if the terms and conditions are met, the minimums, it's got to go.
That's right. Yeah. And so there is, on the paperwork side for the seller, there is an additional agreement we do with the seller specifically that lays out the terms and responsibilities of the auction itself. So there's an auction listing agreement that accompanies the actual ARIA or TREB or whatever listing agreement. And then the terms of the auction itself also lay out the obligations of the bidders and where their responsibility lies the moment they place a bid. From paperwork, though, there is no paperwork filled out in terms of offer documentation or Form 801s or anything like that, except for the winning bidder. So all of these bids along the way are not deemed paper offers per se. They're basically a commitment to offer, I guess is the best way to put it. So everybody who is bidding has made an obligatory, once this ends, if I'm the winner, I am now going to populate the rest of the paperwork. And we actually make the paperwork downloadable as one of those documents. So I mentioned a home inspection, like the actual agreement of purchase and sale. And in some cases, we don't really put the confirmation of co-op because that's not something we need all bidders to be reading necessarily. But the actual agreement of purchase and sale, any accompanying schedules like Schedule B, all that stuff is there for download, and it's fully populated prior to the auction taking place with everything except for the name of the buyer, the purchase price, and in some cases the closing date. But all the other terms of the purchase are already preset and standardized for everybody, which is what allows the auction to take place with price being the only variable in the process. So, for example, the deposit amount, we can use the Kingston auction as an example. The deposit amount for that was preset, I think, at $20,000. So everybody who was bidding knew that the deposit is 20 grand, same sort of idea. It's due within 1 business day, bank draft, blah, blah, blah. The Schedule A, it was an unconditional deal. So we do the home inspection ahead of time so that we can comfortably forego an inspection condition that people require of us. And they've got the ability, if they want to do an independent inspection ahead of time, they can, but we make it available by a third party. The only moving part or the only variable we've seen on the conditions is financing, because that's a bit of a sticky one for a lot of people. Yeah. We have done auctions where everybody gets a financing condition, and that's something that's included in the agreement. For obvious reasons, that's not ideal because it does create the risk that people are going to bid without much regard for whether or not they can actually afford the place. And it leaves us susceptible to it not being a deal that gets done when all is said and done. So for the most recent several, if we're in a market that's familiar with a lot of these crazy blind bidding wars, and generally speaking, people are competing by removing conditions, we won't do it in a place where this isn't the norm in the area. I know in Kingston, that was the norm there. I think we had 1 person out of the 100 who said, I need a financing condition, I can't participate. But generally, there'll be condition-free offers. The rest of the Schedule A is filled out with generic stuff like warranties on chattels and stuff like that. So it's not an as-is sort of thing. It's not quite that, but it is a firm deal on auction day.
So what about stuff like a closing date? You know, maybe there's a range of days that might work, or is it this day or that, or my bid for 400, I can only close on the 12th, but you guys want the 16th and your best bid is 360. How do you jump through those scenarios?
Yeah, closing date is the one that we've done different ways, but it all comes down to the seller, what is your sort of widest comfortable window for closing? If they've got a date that it needs to be, then that's the date that's going to be on the agreement, and that's what gets standardized. If they say, listen, as long as it's 60 days or more, then we'll lay out a window of 60 to 90 or 60 to 120 or something as the window. And the winning bidder then just picks a date within that window. We do say, though, for all of these things, if there is something that doesn't jive with what we've put out there as the standard terms, so a closing date, for example, let's say we say it's got to be, I don't know, June 1st to June 30th. If somebody needed July 5th, we tell them basically call us, call the listing agent, and we can get a written ahead of time approval that that'll be okay or not. However, if we do that, then that becomes transparent to everybody else who's participating, that this is now an additional date that's available. If it's though somebody who says, the example from before, let's say it's a firm offer and somebody says, I need financing, it's a non-starter if I can't. Some of our auctions allow the opportunity for preemptives, which is similar to, so it's kind of a bully approach, but we do it in more of the context of if there's terms that don't work, if the seller's willing, we will accept a preemptive that has an irrevocable prior to the auction date. So come in, 3 days early with a 2-day irrevocable or whatever with the financing. However, then that's still subject to all the same rules of a normal preemptive, where now everybody else is going to be notified and it might ultimately become a blind bidding war anyway.
Right.
So we've had maybe 3 auctions that have sold with the preemptive. The nice thing for the sellers and for the realtors of the seller is that you're going to know what the demand is like on the back end already, whether it be through showings or registrations and all that. And if you know that there's been 3 showings and 1 person on the site is registered and it's the day before the auction and someone wants to put in a preemptive, you might be better off entertaining that, knowing that the bidding at best is going to reach the reserve price and stop because there might only be 1 person participating.
So this system is ultimately flexible as a regular real estate transaction, kind of. You have the flexibility to adapt to market conditions, adapt to changes, and adapt to all this other stuff that's going on, right?
Yeah, I think the only restrictions that we put on sellers and on the process is if there's a reserve price, our seller is disallowed from raising that after we've got the auction agreement. So if they see, oh man, this place is blowing up, let's hike up that reserve price, it's definitely going to go for more. We don't allow that. We also don't allow what's called shill bidding, which is actually something that happens in Australia, which is where people plant fake bidders to just jack the price up. Sure. It's allowed in Australia prior to the reserve price, because if it's not going to sell then anyway, they kind of just have people get action going with bids, but that's not allowed. That's written into the agreement. People can't bid on their own thing. Their family can't bid. We can't bid.
Nobody mentions that when they talk about how awesome the Australian model is, that there's fake bidders. They don't mention the fake bidder part.
It's that's a good segue into, people ask us, well, how do I know these bidders aren't fake? Or how do I know I'm not bidding against a bot or whatever word you want to use, like somebody who's just BS. That's part of the reason why the credit card is involved. So we don't charge anybody to sign up as a bidder, but when they register, very similar to what you do if hotels ever exist again, but at a hotel, when you go and check in, you put like a damage deposit down or pre-authorization. They don't charge you, but they might take $1,000 as a hold in case you trash the room. Same idea, bigger numbers. Pre-authorization for the Kingston one, I think Kingston was a little bit lower because it was a starting list price, but it was still about $1,500 or $2,000 as a pre-authorization that effectively is held. We confirm it's there. So it's taken off the card in like a holding cell, that in the event you win the auction and then say, never mind, I was just kidding, or I'm not going to sign this or whatever, it's an automatic penalty that gets charged to you. It's prohibitive enough that it will deter people from doing stuff like that. And in a lot of ways, it gives you even more comfort than some of the blind offer dates go, where somebody might show up, make a big offer, and then not come with the deposit the next day or whatever, right? Yeah. And you're still governed by all of those rules, because the deposit and all that is still subject to all of RICO's rules and all of everything else, that if someone doesn't come with a deposit, the recourse you have there is the same. However, if somebody doesn't even do what the auction tells you to do, most of our auctions have had those pre-authorization amounts closer to $3,000 and $4,000. So I think it's the credit card. First of all, it prevents against fraud. It helps verify identity because we match that with the person who's on the card, and it gives us a greater comfort that this isn't just somebody with a stolen card trying to buy houses or whatever. But it also has, in every case, we've never had to charge that penalty if that's a question. Like, it's always been a deterrent enough. And at this point, that's as close as we can get to, other than doing them in person, which is how they do it and how most people are used to it in Australia and all these other places. We're online both because of accessibility, because of climate, just being able to, like this last one, allowing people from wherever they are to be able to do it. And it gives us the ability to communicate as much information as possible to as many people as possible with no limitations. So there's no limitations on the platform like with MLS, where there's character limits or description limits or picture limits or whatever. Like, any attachments you want to put on there. We've had auctions that have like 15 attachments, surveys and inspections and whatever. The idea is not just transparency of price, but let's make people as comfortable as possible to just give us a big number. Like, it's meant to get a big number. This isn't an affordability play at all, as some people might think when they talk about blind bidding. Prices get up there with this way as well.
So since we're talking about the money, can you run us through respecting competition guidelines and everything else that you're supposed to respect in both of your, regulated environments? Like, what does this thing cost? Like, how does this actually work?
So we initially had designed this as this is going to be our baby as a brokerage. Like, we built the brokerage to be an auction brokerage. We do 5 to 10% of our listings are by auction. This is now, we've learned, is a nice tool. Like we were talking about before, this is a nice tool that helps get us in the door with some people and whatever. But ultimately, once we really separated the auction house from the brokerage, it became something we can offer to third-party people. So it's pretty simple. It's $1,500 flat to run an auction. That's it. So there's no sharing in commission. There's nothing like that. It's not contingent on selling or not. So and we're painfully critical of people who call us with auction requests. We've done now 2 outside of our brokerage, and we've had easily 50 or 60 requests. If the property is not going to be a fit, we're going to tell you. If you or your client don't have the right sort of expectations, we're going to tell you. It's not in our best interest to charge you $1,500 and then have it fail. Looks bad on the platform, looks bad on you. So
what makes a property not suitable?
Most cases, any property could work, but it's going to come down to the seller's expectation. Could really throw it off. If a seller is one of those who's in a hot market and knows the neighbor just sold for 1.2 with 50 offers, and so they think their place is better and they got to get 1.3, right? And because of that, sure, yeah, we can list at $999, but I want my reserve price to be 1.3 because I'm not going to sell for less. We'll just say piss off, basically, in a nice way. Like, well, it's just not in their best interest, because up until that reserve price is hit, it's a blind bidding war. Like, yeah, you can see the number, but nobody knows if it's going to be purchased or not. So it's really just a glorified blind process with a little bit more transparency. It's once that reserve is hit that things go bonkers. And we've seen that with every auction. It's a difficult thing to show people when they haven't seen it before, that you want a reserve price that's reasonable, because that's when the action starts. With Kingston, there were maybe 4 bids. Well, sorry, Kingston didn't have reserve. With Burlington, the one we did before that, there were 4 bids up until the reserve price, and then about 60 after. Because
it's blind until the reserve is met. So is that what we're saying?
The reserve price is blind, but you'll still see the leading bids. So so like if it's 500, like the example from before, you'll see the bids at 510, but it'll say reserve not yet met. And until it says reserve met, everyone's like, what am I even doing here? Like, I'm just bidding, but I'm still not getting the place. And I get that. However, the challenge that we ran into is that people are wired already for these blind offer dates and for places that are underpriced, and they see a number and they know that's not what it's going to get. So Kingston was a really comfortable and unique change for us in that we were able to list at the number we were willing to take and let it go up from there. But in a lot of markets, especially the GTA, we see places listed at 899 that are going to go for 1.1. If we started an auction at 899 with a reserve of 1.1, it doesn't work. Like, we generally have a spread of no more than 5% from starting bid to reserve, and if it goes beyond that, it's just not, it's as icky as the blind bidding war is, right? Like, it just starts to feel like you guys are just the same as everybody else.
So how do you, so you're trading in markets, you're auctioning in markets you don't trade. So how do you, how do you determine reserve price and percent of fair market value and all those things? Do you work with the realtor, the listing realtor on that?
Exactly.
What is that? Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Like, we will always, if we don't know where we're playing, then we're not going to be the listing agent. I mean, we now, like, as a brokerage, that's part of the reason we've got a good spread of agents in our neck of the woods. Like, doesn't extend to Ottawa, so don't worry, you guys can call, it's all yours. but yeah, it's a straight up valuation. It's good conversation with the seller. Like, the seller and the realtor need to be on the same page and motivated that this is a process that they like. It's not a process that's for everybody. There's two really clear camps, those that say this is amazing for sellers and those that say this is amazing for buyers. And the interesting thing about that is, inherently, that also means they think it's bad for the other side, but there's arguments on both sides.
So tell me about that. That there's one of our direct questions is, it's great for a buyer, but I absolutely know a seller's leaving money on the table.
Right. So my answer to that is, we now have proof of concept to prove otherwise. That's the easiest way to answer that. But the reason is, definitely can there be one of those kind of cowboy bidders, which we've seen, who show up at 150 grand higher than everybody else and blow everybody else out of the water, and otherwise it would have sold at something much lower, right? The difference is, we have found that with this process, so many more people participate, remain involved, and are comfortable jacking up their bid as high as they're comfortable. And in some cases, good or bad, emotions really get involved in an auction when you see the number in front of you and you see, oh man, $1,000 more bucks and we're in the lead. Click the button, right? Versus an agent coming to you and saying, okay, they sent us all back. And you're like, well, what does that mean?
Or saying, oh, you're maybe $1,000 off. Or
right.
Maybe we need to maybe jump $5,000. We hope. We think.
We don't know. Exactly. And like, let's do it. Let's put our best foot forward. And I've had clients, a lot of you have had clients who say, like, I don't want to go as high as I'm willing because I might not need it. But then you also have clients who see the sale price the next day and say, shit, I would have paid that, right? Those are the situations where, if it was an auction, they would have paid that and it would have kept going. So generally in an auction, again, to go back to when it's good and when it's bad, if you're in a market where there's not competition, like, an auction is predicated on competition. So if you've got a niche property that hasn't been selling for 200 days and you think an auction is a good idea, it's not. Like, it's a bad idea. So, because you're going to have, your best case scenario is that one dream buyer comes and pays the lowest possible number the platform will allow, and maybe you sell it that way. But when you've got a situation where there is this caravan of 10, 15 agents who are going from house to house to house in the same area and losing, and 14 lose and go to the next one, and then 2 more, that's where you want this, because they're all hating the process, the blind approach. They've all been burned. They still don't trust it fully. Is there still the situation where someone's ready to crack and they'd go super high? Absolutely. Like, that's something that could happen. But there's certainty you're getting everybody up to their maximum with this, which in a lot of cases is going to drive, if you get 2 people who are ready to go with a crazy offer, then you can just get them duking it out at an ask. Like, that's kind of what happened with Kingston. There were 3 people in the end who had gone beyond what anybody thought this place was going to go for. I'm not going to say what it was worth, because it's worth what someone's going to pay for it, I guess.
They paid. Yep.
But one thing that we were told, which is a really cool line that an auctioneer who we're friends with here said, is that there's no recommended retail price for real estate. If you've heard that line before, we really like that. That's what started to drive this. And this is one of those things where we're trying to do work that people look at in the public as, pick your negative word, sleazy, like opaque, whatever. and we're trying to take as much of the sleaze out of it as we can, but there's always inherently going to be people who are going to spend what they're going to spend. We're just giving them a forum to do it in a way that makes them as comfortable as possible, really, so they spend as much as possible. Like, that's the goal here. The seller is the client. But on the flip side of that, it's clear why it's good for buyers. Like, part of the irony is that it's good for buyers because it allows them to jack up their price as comfortable, as high as they're comfortable going. So again, it's not an affordability thing. We have had auctions go any different way. We had one that did go just to the reserve and stop. It happens.
Yep.
We've had one that didn't reach the reserve and sold after the auction was over. Like, that's the equivalent of a bidding of an offer date where you don't get the number you wanted, right? Like, it happens.
Right. Yep.
The difference is everybody got to see how high it went. So the world will know where the bidding went. And generally in that case, the way it works is the seller still has the opportunity to accept that high bid, or they can negotiate with the people with a little bit more information on the table. Everyone knows, okay, you all know how high it went. We're not comfortable with that. Can we work something out? Or it relists. Like, I mean, we haven't relisted before. We've always gone the negotiation after the fact, maybe take the 2 or 3 high bidders and just said, we're sending y'all back for one offer. Sorry, transparent didn't work, but now we're back to what you're used to.
So what about this situation where someone wants to do it on their own? I want to go and buy a lawn sign, and $1,500 sounds like just right for me. Can you throw it up on the auction platform and let's see what happens?
We cannot, and we won't. I mean,
tell me why.
I guess, well, I shouldn't say we cannot. We could. I mean, I guess as the auction house, if we wanted to play that game, we could. We're not. And it says, even on the website, there's a section there, which I think we need to tweak because it is a little misleading. It does show the 1,500 there, and it says it's for realtors only, and it says it's for brokerages only. But we have had calls from people saying, yeah, I got a house and 1,500 sounds good. I want to auction it.
Right.
It's not happening. Like, for a multitude of reasons. One, the nuances of real estate and the requirement that everything we put on the platform has a degree, a standard of care and a standard of quality is important to us. Like, we don't put iPhone pictures on the listings. Like, it's got to be a good listing, presented well with the information we require. And again, people who are misinformed are going to do it as a gimmick and probably fail. And that's just, it's not our business model. Like, we're not looking to turn this into hundreds of thousands of auctions across Canada that just maybe work, maybe don't. And like eBay, that's not what we're looking to do. Like, we're running a brokerage every day where that's our focus as individuals. The auction platform is a great tool that now can run pretty independently of what we do, with the exception of when we've got auctions on the go, we're very engaged with the listing agent with anything they need. So that when I say $1,500, what that basically is, it's building it, but then it's also being effectively the auction help desk and all things auction, so that the listing agent doesn't have to be drowning in questions they can't answer. That being said, we make sure you know everything. Like, we'll run a webinar during your auction period that's live for people who are signing up so that we can engage as many people as possible. But we're trying to get to the point too, where a lot of this stuff is automated as well, where if you want to do it, it's not just pay us a fee, it's also watch this hour long, here's everything you need to know as a listing agent, to make sure you're comfortable with it as well. But yeah, I mean, we're trying to make all aspects of it as simple as possible. It is simple in terms of logging on and clicking to bid. It's a freaky thing. We get it. For people to click a button for $1 million is messed up, but it's also, it's happened. Like, the first time somebody actually did it, we're like, holy shit, like, people will actually do this. And truth, and I don't even know what time it is, and I'll pull back after this, but the true story of our first auction was we had CBC with us for it. I don't know if you know this story, Jody. I don't know.
No, this is awesome.
Because we did it and we were sort of doing it with permission. Like, we weren't prepared to ask for forgiveness, but it was such uncharted territory that nobody knew what was happening. It was an assignment sale, and it was a guy who I'm pretty close with, who trusted us with it. It was the old GM of the Argos. So all the stuff behind me, like, he put his faith in it. And so we're in a boardroom. We didn't have an office at the time, so we're in a rented boardroom. CBC's in the room, the red light's on us. We had the auction open for 3 days because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know how long to leave it open. And now we're in the final hour where they were going to film it. There were 0 bids, 3 days in, 0 bids. And I had told Jim, who's the client, I said, listen, they know that we know each other, but like, you can be a little bit grilling on me. Like, let's play this up. Like this isn't, we're all buddies here. So, parental advisory for what's about to come. So he comes, so they're filming, we're doing this pre-interview stuff. He bursts into the boardroom, goes, Steinfeld, what the fuck? This is the worst auction I've ever seen. This is the worst platform I've ever seen. And I'm like, Jim, tone it down. And no bids, and CBC got that on camera. And this was actually dangerous for him because he's a bit of a public figure, but it was fine. And then they shifted their questioning to, so if there's no bids on this, is this a humongous failure? Like, is this a big failure? Are you going to shut down shop? Is this it? Da, da, da. And so we were sweating. I might have peed a little. I'm not sure. But anyway, the first bid didn't come in until 5 minutes left in the auction. And this was after 3 days because everybody was convinced this worked like eBay, where if you're the last one in there with 3 seconds left, you're going to win the property. So why am I going to bid with 2 days left, show my cards when I can bid with 5 seconds left? So 5 minutes left, a bid came in, exhales, and then another bid came in, and it was just like, oh, and it did sell, thank God, and everything was good in the end. And that was a big learning for us in a lot of different ways. It does segue into what happens in the final minutes of an auction. But that was our first one, and it was thankfully successful. But yeah, we didn't know what we were doing when we started.
That's like the most entrepreneurial real estate story I think I've really ever heard. You know, where you're doing something completely new. There's no path. There's no information. No one's done it before. You might as well be trying to, you know, send a Tesla to outer space. Like, it's just not happened, right? And
yeah.
so, you know, good on you guys for getting the balls and the business sense to actually, you know, give it a go. You know, that's you know, I'm glad that this stuff and these kind of innovations exist. And so who's your ideal, you know, client? Like, what's the ideal situation? Someone watching this video, like, okay, I watched Dan for a little while, it's really cool. You know, how am I going to know when I've got something that's worth calling, you know, you for?
So, I mean, first of all, you need to love the concept. If you're a listing broker, like if this is something that your client calls you and says, I saw a CTV story or whatever on auctions, that looks really cool, I want to do it. But in the pit of your stomach, you're like, this is junk and I don't want to lose this client. So, okay, but I don't love it. Don't bother. Like, I mean, we love that people are interested, but you need to be all in on the concept. So does your client, number one. Number two, be in an area where there's competition, like be in an area where a bidding war situation would work, because this will work in those areas for sure. And the asterisk to that when you're saying, okay, well, why should I do this instead of a bidding war? I mean, number one, we've talked about the benefits and the potential to get more money, but we've learned, and Kingston's a great example, at least in this window we're in right now, this is so new that every time we do one, this gets a multiple number of eyeballs than all the bidding wars on the same street. So whether it's the media, whether it's just the buzz in the market, you know, buyers who come across it, there are rules which might vary board to board. So I don't want to speak to Ottawa, but there are rules about what and where in a listing you can disclose that it's an auction, and the specifics about how it works. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be in the broker remarks in Ottawa or not. It's a little loose here where we can say it's an auction, but we can't link to the auction from the remarks. So there's like, there's moving parts to it. But ultimately, at least at this moment in time, this is a great way to put your listing on the map. So even as a marketing tool, it's not a gimmick, but it definitely separates you from the pack in a competitive marketplace. It allows people to participate from anywhere. It allows people to participate at any time. So right now the auctions are open for about 3 hours, but we've introduced what's called a pre-bidding window, where if somebody knows their maximum and they want to participate, but they're not going to be there, or they just don't want to be sitting at their computer, you can put in your max 3 days early. It doesn't show up on the site. It's confidential. It just kind of gets logged in whatever techie security that I don't understand back end there is. And then when the auction opens, any pre-bids that there were, the best of those, it's as if they were made at the beginning of the auction, and the auction just opens with a higher number right out of the gate with the leading bidder. That's what happened with Kingston as well.
That's really exciting. So you mentioned the $1,500. Is there any other fees? Any other, like, what else is? Can you kind of break it down really quickly for us what to expect?
Nothing else. That's pretty quickly. Yeah.
So buyer commission, seller commission, like is there splits on there, or?
I mean, you do what you're doing as a broker. So we do disclose, that is one thing. We do disclose the co-op commission, not on the listing, but when somebody is placing a bid, part of the transparency is in the terms they get when they press bid. It basically says something to the effect of, I understand there's cooperating commission paid to the buyer agent on this. It's basically them acknowledging it's almost like a confirmation of co-op that they would be signing. It basically says, I understand my agent will be receiving 2.5 or whatever.
Sure.
But it's all done the same way. So full co-op, you take your listing commission. The first model we did, we thought this would make sense for us to kind of share in that. The problem is, I mean, we still can't control the success or failure of the auction. We can only guide you as to what we think is going to work best for you, and you know your market again, right? So if you misprice it or put a reserve that's too high and it doesn't sell, we still need it to be protected for the work that we're doing on the front end to build it and all of that as well. That's why it's a flat fee, but that's all it is from us. And no, we haven't done one in Ottawa yet. I can see some of the questions there. Kingston's as close as we've come.
You might. It's
going to be a race. It's going to be a race to see who's going to call you first.
I mean, you know what? Let me throw in there. I know we're getting late, but the process, as far as how that works, if you are interested in doing it, we can forward out there what the listing agreement actually looks like. So you do a listing agreement with your client that's signed by us, you and your client. That's that auction agreement, so that everybody understands what that is. That can or doesn't have to show the fee that's due. Like if you don't really want to be talking about that part with your client, you don't have to. We have had people ask if their client can pay it if they want. I mean, you do you, whatever. If you negotiate that, like, it happens. But then the actual process of building the auction is the easiest way we've found it is if you have like an MLS data sheet that you use right now to input into your MLS, if you can send us that, we can use that to populate ours. Only we're allowed to put more information. So anything you want to throw in there that maybe is a bit restrictive, you just send us, if there's a Google Drive link to the pictures or whatever, we do build it for you. Another kind of next level thing we're trying to build that hopefully will bring the cost down too is a platform where you can log in yourself and just build it. Like go in and just populate everything. And then it won't be 1,500 anymore because we won't have as much work to do on our end. But right now, that's pretty much it. You build it. Any inquiries that come in, we forward to you. So people can ask questions from the auction page. If you want to see past auction pages, like if you go to 585davis.com, it's still up. That was the Kingston auction. So you can see what the end of that page looked like. I mean, we can send you as many as you want. We've also got webinars we've done that we can share. I'm happy to talk offline with anybody as well.
So we're going to send out
awesome.
we're going to send out all the contact details and,
what's the best website for you?
For people to see our stuff, you mean?
Yeah, to get a hold of you.
I mean, if you go to otbauctions.com, that's the auction site. There's also a demo there, which you can do anytime. You can buy yourself a fake house. You can do an auction. There's fake houses for sale every day. Don't worry. They're not real. People have asked us, nervous that they placed a fake bid, that they might be on the hook for a house. You'll know it's a demo. There's things everywhere. But yeah, if you go there, you can contact us. You can contact, you can find us on social. We're turning into those people. So feel free to.
Maybe a podcast or two.
Oh yeah. I mean, our podcast isn't just about auctions, but it is for realtors. So yeah, I mean, plug the podcast. We need more real estate listeners for sure. Level up. That's awesome. The podcast. But yeah, it's easy to find me. I mean, go through Matt and Jody. I mean, I can give you stuff to put on the page if you want to share that. And
yeah, we'll do.
I know the answer, but what does OTB stand for?
That's on the block.
OTB on the block.
That's on the block. So On the Block Realty is the brokerage. GetOnTheBlock.com is the brokerage. If you want to go visit us there, you can see everybody else.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, good. We wish all the best to you and your partner, all health and everything. Thank you
I think she's
so
good.
much.
I haven't
Yeah,
heard from her. I don't know if we told everybody. She's like,
We-
she's going to baby pop any second now. So I might have had to run, but she's fine.
yeah, we had a slight scare this morning. It was like we might have to cancel.
Yeah,
So
there might
no,
be a
thank
baby on our
you.
kitchen floor right now. I don't know.
Thank you so much for being here. I think this has been really great to help us understand really what you guys do and what you're looking to do, especially just within the industry, and how you have a service that we can essentially help use. And I think it's just really informative for us. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully by the sounds of the chat, we're definitely going to have a few in the next few months. So thank you so much for everything. We really do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Look forward to seeing you on the block.
Nice.
Cheers.
All right. Later.